In today's video, I've got a super duper awesome treat to share with you, something that I've been obsessed with recently, and I believe it's mainly because there are no rules. You can literally do whatever you want to do, and you could come up with something that's going to be truly unique to your style and for whoever that you're making it for. But today, we are going to learn how to make Scrappy Pals. Well, I call them Scrappy Pals, but a lot of other people call them Scrappy dolls, and these are just some of the examples of Scrappy Pals that I've made before. This is literally using just random stuff out of my scrap bin. I have ribbon, I have fabric, I have buttons. There's all sorts of different things that you can do. And again, it's so amazing because you can literally just do whatever. On today's video, I'm going to teach you how I make my Scrappy dolls. We'll go over all the different steps, different options that you can use for the hair, for the legs, for the embellishments, and things like that. So grab your sewing gear and let's get to it. So first off, for this project, you're going to need to get some items out of your stash. Now, I have actually collected a plethora of trims and bits and bobs, all sorts of things that can be used to embellish your doll. Now, you can use lace, you can use ribbon, like literally anything that you've got in your stash will work for this particular project. And depending on what kind of doll that you want to make, if you want to make more masculine, more feminine, more just whatever, doesn't even matter. You can just choose whatever that you've got. Now, I've got some scrap felt that I actually acquired from a friend of mine that I like to use for the face. And mainly because I've been doing a little bit of like embroidery on the faces, and the felt just kind of has a good feel to it, but feel free to use just normal fabric as well. I also got a bunch of buttons that were really cool looking, and I decided that for my style of Scrappy doll that I wanted it to have basically where at least one eye was like a button eye, and then the other one was like either missing or it was another kind of button. Now, for your Scrappy doll, you're going to need a main fabric and a back fabric. The pieces that I'm using are approximately 8 inches by 5 inches, but that's not anything that's, set in stone. Those are just some pieces that I've had around for a while and seem to work out pretty well. Now, also, this is the time to get all of that ribbon that you've been holding on to for a long time. This is the time to get it out and to utilize it. I got my little bin of different types of ribbon, and I also got some straps that I was going to use on a tote bag that didn't come to fruition, and decided to use those items for this doll. Now, these two fabrics, I thought that they were going to work pretty well. I was going to do a more masculine type of doll for this project, but I decided to use these two mainly because they were right there together, and because I kind of wanted to do a blue-ish coordinating doll. That's just kind of how it works, so I was like, let's roll with it. So I decided to start just getting some things out of that scrap bin, trial and error, just seeing what I've got and seeing what might work for this particular style. I've done so many different ones. It just kind of whatever comes together is what I roll with. But these are actually all of the parts that you'll need for your Scrappy doll. So first off, what I like to do is I like to sew on the face. These faces I've been working on in my free time. You can see the embroidery that I've done on it. But what you're going to do is just attach the face onto the front of your doll. And I just used a straight stitch and went all the way around the edge. Since I'm using felt, it's not going to fray, But if you want to use a zigzag stitch or some other fancy stitch, feel free. You can also hand stitch it if you want. But first off, I like to attach the face. And then next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add the embellishments on the front. Now, because of the bin that I kept with me, I went back and forth with what I wanted to do. I was like, do I want to use these shiny bits? Do I want to just keep it basic? Yeah, most of the time when I'm doing a Scrappy doll, I can't keep it too basic. But I like to just experiment with different looks and just see whatever it is that's striking me in the moment. And once you do figure out what you want to put on there, you're just going to attach it to the front, again with hand sewing or machine sewing, or even if you're using glue, you can do that as well. But what I did was I took all of my pieces to my sewing machine and stitched everything down so that it was nice and secure. And this is what we've got so far for the front. Now, what I'm using for the hair is going to be that small rickrack that I showed you earlier. And the way you want to attach it is you want to attach it on the front top, and then you make your doll, it's going to flip up and be sticking out like hair. But also be aware that you don't want to have the hair on the top over into your seam allowance, because otherwise it's going to fold over and it's going to look weird. I've done that plenty of times with a doll, and I just kind of roll with it. Sometimes I'll cut it off, but it just adds to the character of the doll. So once you get your hair attached, what I like to do is go ahead and sew it onto the front. That way, whenever I'm assembling the full doll, it keeps things nice and secure. So once you flip it up, this is what it's going to look like whenever your doll gets done. Next, I'm going to add the arms. And since I'm using this big rickrack, what I like to do if I'm using ribbon or something like that is I'll just tie a knot towards the end of it and use that as like the hands of the doll. Again, this is not something that's necessary. You can leave them floppy. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's just kind of something that kind of defines the hand part of the doll in my brain, so I just kind of roll with it. Sometimes I will actually make like a little stuffed tube for the arms and the legs, but if I want to keep it easy peasy, I'll just go with some ribbon or something like this. But what you want to do is just cut your arms to similar lengths. Again, this is not something that you have to do. If you want it to be asymmetrical, feel free. But on the arms and legs, I do try my best to kind of make each arm and each leg similar sizes. Now, once you've got those cut down, what you're going to do is you're going to attach them approximately in an area on the sides that makes sense. Another thing you want to make aware of is once you put on your back and you're ready to kind of sew and make your doll shape, you want to make sure that the ends of the arms are not caught in the sides when you're sewing. And now this was another little piece that I added after the fact, was I just kind of wanted to give this doll a little handle. So this is actually going to be on the back of the doll, not on the front, but I'm going to be sewing it at the same time. It'll make sense once I turn everything inside out or right side out at the end. But I actually was going to have it towards the middle of the doll, and then once I saw that I had the arms and all that embellishment to sew over, I decided to move it up so it wasn't quite so bulky to go through all of the, all those layers on my sewing machine. I don't have an industrial machine. I just have a normal, like, standard home one, so it does what it can do. But now, once you've got everything squared away and you're happy with where you want to put everything, we're going to go ahead and put the back fabric on top. And I ended up turning my entire project like over and sewing it. But yeah, this is where you want to watch the sides and make sure that you bring those arms in so that you don't sew it whenever you're going all the way around the outside. But I like to use clips and pins. I usually like to use clips, but there are parts of this project where I did go ahead and use some pins instead. Sometimes if you just need that extra security of a pin, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, this is where I took everything, and because my back piece was slightly bigger than my front piece, that's the whole reason why I turned it over, was because I wanted to be able to see my stitches and make sure that I was getting all the layers at the same time. But if both of your pieces are the same, then you won't have to do this step. So you can just skip on to the next one. But what we're going to end up doing is whenever I do my dolls, I like to stuff them from the bottom. So whenever you get everything pinned, clipped, and secured, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to sew on 3 sides of your doll, and you're going to leave the bottom open for turning and for stuffing. Now, one thing I did want to say, that whenever you start sewing around the outside edge of your doll, wherever the arms or some extra embellishments are, you can give it a little bit of a back stitch just to reinforce things. So I just do give it a little bit of a back stitch on those spots just for extra security. Also, when you get to the end, the bottom right there, when you're gonna stuff, you want to go ahead and do a couple back stitches on the front end, on the front end, and also on the back end, so that when you're stuffing, all your stitches don't rip. But once you get everything sewn, you're just going to go ahead and trim any extra bulk that is in those corners. And I also needed to trim the bottom area of mine since my pieces weren't exactly the same. Again, this was just me using some scraps and randomness that I had, so. But once you get everything sewn, you're going to turn your doll where the right side is out, and we're almost done. Like, see, this is really like quick project that can be done in like just like a little bit of time. But this is where we're at so far. This is our little doll. What we're going to do now is we are actually going to stuff our doll. And I'm taking the little clippings that I cut off and I'm just putting that on the inside, because since I stuff my dolls with scrap fabric anyway, it's just, you know, part of the upcycling, recycling nature of these dolls. But again, I'm using just some scrap fabric, making it into a ball and sticking it in there. Again, feel free to put whatever that you like. I've heard some people actually put rice in their dolls, and I think that's just to kind of give it stability so that it would like sit upright. But make sure that you don't stuff your doll too full, because you still got to close the bottom. I actually did make that mistake on the first few ones that I did, and it was very, very tough to close the bottom. Now, what you can do is, if you do want it to be super scrappy, you can either leave the edge raw. But what I've started doing is actually turning over that bottom edge and kind of sewing that secure. Now, one thing that I did not account for is the little strap, the little embellishment that's on the bottom kind of made it a little hard to turn that edge over. But after, messing around with it, I did figure it out. And before I closed that gap, what I did was I went ahead and these are the straps that I was going to use for my legs. I was actually going to do something different, but I decided to just use these straps because I had them. And what I did was I cut them a little bit longer than the arm length just because they're legs, and I felt like they needed to be longer than the arms. But if you wanted them to be super long or super short, or I've done braided versions of the legs. Again, this is just what I pulled out of the bin and decided, hey, let's roll with it. So, but in that little fold there on the bottom, I just put the ends of those legs. And once I got those pinned and secured, I went over to the sewing machine and went ahead and closed that bottom up. I will show you a close up of what it looks like. I did do the same kind of reinforcement and back stitching on the legs as I did with the arms for the same reason as before, just making sure that they're going to stay where they need to be. And now you're just going to sew on that bottom edge. Like I said, we're going to go ahead and give it a little back stitch. Sorry, my hand got in the way here. I did not realize that it was just in the forefront when I was trying to show y'all what I'm doing. But yeah, on those legs, a little bit of a back stitch, making sure everything is nice and secure. And now, essentially, that's it. That is your doll. I did kind of mess with the stuffing and get it kind of fluffed out a little bit, but you could stop right here if you wanted to. Now, one thing that I did end up doing on this doll was on the feet, the ends of the legs. I was going to put a little piece of scrap fabric, which you can kind of see there in the middle of the screen, but what I did instead was I just hemmed the bottom, just kind of did a double fold and sewed a little 1/8 inch seam right on the ends just so that it wouldn't fray too much. That is it. Again, there's so many possibilities that you can do. That is how I make my Scrappy dolls. As you can see, this is a little cool guy because he's got his legs crossed. But yeah, this is a great project to just get that scrap bin out, pull some stuff out, go to town, and see where your imagination will take you. But thank you for watching this tutorial. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions, and I thank you for watching.